Welcome, Kensington Historical Society. Glad you're here. And this is a particularly fulfilling evening for me because I've gotten to know Eileen over the last couple of years. She's president of Montgomery Preservation, Inc., in addition to wearing many other hats, which you'll discover as she talks. And Montgomery Preservation is a county preservation organization largely made up by representatives from different historical societies around the county and at-large members. So I took a seat that had been there for Kensington Historical Society, and I've had a total immersion in all things preservation, and there's no one better to learn from than Eileen. Her history in Montgomery County is like no other in terms of her preservation advocacy and the organizations that she's run, including Montgomery Preservation. So one of the reasons we thought this would be a good idea in terms of timing, as you know, this is a year we're exploring Montgomery County's 250th history. We're doing what we refer to as Kensington adjacent history in terms of our programming. And Montgomery History, the organization, has did embark starting last year in a project to update the historical record of Montgomery County. And the way they did that is to make a call for papers by historians and other notables in the county who wanted to research certain aspects of history that had not been presented well or at all or needed updating from the last iteration that Montgomery History did in 1976. So Eileen has been doing that. So she's been kind of immersing herself in the history of preservation in the county for reasons of making that publication. So we're the beneficiaries of all that knowledge, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Well, it is great to be in Kensington. My first visit to Kensington was when I was 16 years old, and I came to get my driver's license here. I passed the written test and I failed the parking, so I had to come back. But I've been here many times since, and particularly since Kensington Historical Society has had a home here. I hope you know how lucky you are, A, to live and work and play in Kensington, and also to have a Kensington Historical Society that does so much and that people are so attuned to, and a town government that has always been very supportive. So I am going to talk about, as Kate says, the history of historic preservation in Montgomery County, which can't be told without knowing that there are other levels of history. So this is what I'm going to talk about, the history of preservation, what is worthy of preservation in Montgomery County, how it works in the county, current issues, why does it matter, particularly now, and we'll have time for comments and your questions. It is in here. Okay. Till it's gone in paradise, the parking lot. I did not know that Joni Mitchell traveled with me from home to here, so I'm delighted that she did. That is the preservationist song, so you've heard it. All right, this is a pantheon of people. Some of them you'll recognize, some of them you will not. Some of them I'll talk about. Anybody recognize anyone? I see at least one Kensington person in there. Yes, Julie O'Malley is there. I'm the one in the green sweater. But there are people from all over who have been part and parcel of having preservation come to Montgomery County and making it work in Montgomery County. So I'm going to start with the guy on the left who is my mentor. And let me see. So I want to start with this gentleman here, who was my professor at GW and my mentor. He moved to Montgomery County after being all over the world doing planning and working with Frank Lloyd Wright and architecture and all sorts of things, but he became a member of the Montgomery County Historical Society, which I think many of you are, and he bought a farm up county. And by 1958, he was volunteering for this new historical society, and he said, why aren't we looking at what's all around us and trying to save it? Why are we just looking at the history of old families, old white families usually, but old families and the history of these oldest houses? Let's start preserving what we had. So I really think of Fritz Guttheim as the person who started all this off. What started it nationally, and in my chapter I am going to talk about nationally, is the act that Congress passed in 1966, known as the National Historic Preservation Act. And this act is what put together what the federal government believed they wanted to do, and it's been added on to, but things like the National Register of Historic Places and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, but also setting up state historic preservation offices. In our state, it's the Maryland Historical Trust and the whole apparatus that goes along with that. So that is the guide of what you see for preservation today. Rockville is my base, has been my preservation base for a long time, but it's also where preservation got started from a more organized way in the 1970s, and I'll go back and forth a little bit, but it's the county seat, so everybody's watching. It was a community that chose, like 800 other communities throughout the United States, chose to take urban renewal and use it to get rid of all the things it didn't want in its town center and to keep a few buildings and then work around that for things that it wanted to have in the future. So urban renewal certainly, and that's a picture of a demolition in the middle there, urban renewal was certainly an initiative that made people think, are we losing something? One of the buildings that was saved was the red brick courthouse, and that's because of the Montgomery County Historical Society and the fourth graders who marched up and down to the county office building saying, we want to keep that. St. Mary's Church was another initiator of things going on in Rockville as well. The church was deciding in the mid-1960s that it needed to expand. The Roman Catholic population of Montgomery County was really exploding nicely in the after World War II, and particularly in the 50s and the 60s, so they wanted a larger church, and they were ready to tear down the 1817 chapel that was there, and there was a big outcry. The mayor and council said, okay, and the archdiocese said, okay, we'll listen to you. The mayor and council said, we need some sort of law, we need some sort of program that does see what we have in our community and what are we going to do with it. So I was part of the group that started the map that you see over there, which is a map of West Montgomery Avenue, South Washington Street, over by the B&O station, where the first 3 historic districts were established in Montgomery County. And that was done through the city of Rockville. So things are going on everywhere. In Tacoma Park, if you've been here long enough, you know about the big 10-lane highway that was supposed to come off of what became 270, go right through the middle of Tacoma Park and provide an escape route for Congress in case of emergency and for other people to come in. Helen's shaking her head. And Tacoma Park in the 1960s was pushing back against that. So Tacoma Park was very much of a leader in it. In Rockville, it was St. Mary's. It was the new population included places like Twin Brook. These are the new populations that are moving in, and there's a boom everywhere in Montgomery County. Particularly in the down county, but everywhere in Montgomery County, there's a population boom. soldiers coming home from World War II, starting families, needing starter homes that they can get for under $10,000. You have to have schools for all these new kids who are being born. There are all kinds of, the churches and things that are going on. So you really have to do, put that in the context of that. In context of Rockville and its preservation program, and Peerless Rockville, which is a sister organization to Kensington Historical Society. The start of that was the building on the right-hand side, and that is a bulldozer nipping away at it. In 1973, it was on South Washington Street, and we had the ordinance that designated historic districts, but we didn't have the non-governmental entity that could come in and start doing whatever it needed to do to make preservation happen. So that was the start of Peerless Rockville. The bicentennial, which Kate mentioned, very much was on people's minds 50 years ago. And it spurred all sorts of books about individual communities, as well as a grateful remembrance. It spurred Sugarloaf Regional Trails, which had hiking, biking, and canoeing trails up county. It spurred people to celebrate the bicentennial. And again, what do we have and what do we want to hang on to? Okay. The Montgomery County Planning Board was very much a leader in all of this. And in 1976, this is Prince George's County and Montgomery County going together to ask each of their historians, and Mike Dwyer on the left was Montgomery County's Montgomery Planning's historian for a long time. Park and Planning is divided into the two counties, and each one has its own staff and its own things that it does. So Mike spent my dream job 2 years going around the county in a Jeep with a map from 1889, and everything that was on that map showed up in this Atlas of Historic Sites, which was published in 1976. It didn't get everything that was needed to be noticed, but it was a starting place. And and Jim Sorensen was the archaeologist with Montgomery Planning who was doing his aspect of it. But the real spark plug in this was Royce Hansen, who had 2 times as the head of the Montgomery County Planning Board, and his first term was from the mid-1970s through early 1980s, and he was the one who said, let's start looking at this, having a master plan, which is what Montgomery County does, for each thing, bicycles, rustic roads, whatever the topic is, let's have a master plan for historic preservation. So the plan was drawn up. There were a lot of people who were involved in that. From Kensington, the person who was most involved was Mavis Fitzsimons. And if you knew her, you were very, very fortunate. The master plan on its front page is dedicated to her because she died in an accident just before the plan came out. But so there were people from all over Montgomery County who worked to put together how is Montgomery County going to do its historic preservation officially. And another piece of that, by the way, is the Ag Reserve. And the master plan is dated 1979. The Ag Reserve is dated 1980, both under the leadership of Royce Hansen and both initiatives of Maryland National Capital Park and Planning, Montgomery County. And the first site that was so the master plan set up the Historic Preservation Commission, and I was on that commission. The first site that we had to look at to see how the rules were going to, and we'll talk about the rules later, but how the rules were going to be applied was this building right here, which is a really very sweet little 1815 house with a gambrel roof and wooden parts and some other parts as well, but it was right in the middle of what the county had just selected to be the county landfill. So the county agreed, and this is Royce Hansen doing a lot of this helping to make this happen as well. But the county agreed that if this site was put on the master plan, that it would be saved, but, and it would have to go through the Historic Preservation Commission for the criteria for what happens when you make changes for something, like moving it off the site of the landfill. So the first application that came to the HPC was for this house, and how many of the 20-some outbuildings do you want to include in that move? So the commission ended up choosing 5 outbuildings, and it was indeed moved, and it's a very wonderful spot still. So where to start saying what in Montgomery County is worth preserving? And you'll recognize some of these places, but they're big, they're grand, they're made of all different things, they are all different types of historic resources, and they are all over the county. I'm sure you recognize some of them, and if you have questions about any of them, just what's the one on the left, I'm happy to answer. These are also worth preserving. Train stations. We are really lucky to have a few of the train stations that once were on the Metropolitan branch, and I can say that one of the most active ones is the Kensington station. But the train stations by the 1970s and 1980s, and the communities that still had them. A lot of communities had them, and they were, many of them were torn down when the B&O and CSX were making their decisions about whether to keep up a particular train station or whether not. The same thing with urban renewal in Rockville, and what kind of things are we going to build around that, and in rural Montgomery County as well. And then I guess I put that little slide in there with people because what also is worth preserving are the people's stories. How did people live? What did they do to make ends meet? How did things change for them over the years? Are their communities still the same that their parents and their grandparents came to when they were coming up? And here are some more. I'm sure you recognize the one in the lower middle, but barns at the foot of Sugarloaf Mountain, 1950s for the county office building, the Germantown Bank, little farmhouses everywhere, streetscapes everywhere, but there are just lots of wonderful places in Montgomery County. So how does preservation work in the county today? Owners of historic properties are very much involved as a function of local government, nonprofit organizations, and others who care, like descendants and neighbors. So we'll go through this. So owners. You can see a sampling of them here. Owners who take chances on buildings that are in terrible condition, owners who want to change the use of something so it will stay, a cemetery that where the owners had died off, and reenacting that. So creative use, reuse. The old post office building in Rockville is now the police station. Glen Echo, what an incredible reuse. The Silver Spring Station, the cider barrel in Germantown. These are all things that owners do. The Perry store, the bank on the corner of Falls and River Road, Glenview Mansion in Rockville. If you've ever been to the Museum of African American History and Culture and seen the post-emancipation log house, that is from a Black community near Poolsville, and of course the Girl Scouts with Rockwood. Lot of creativity. So local government has a very important role, and the master plan and the laws that follow that all fall under this Montgomery County Code and the preservation of historic resources, and it encompasses all these different people. Montgomery Planning, which has an historic preservation staff, the Historic Preservation Commission, which is appointed, the Department of Permitting Services, which lets building permits, the planning board itself, which makes recommendation, and the county council, which decides whether buildings and streetscapes are going to be on the master plan. So what all of these groups do, with the exception of permitting services, is to evaluate the significance of the historic individual site or the historic district. And so it gets documented, it gets nominated for designation to the master plan, or maybe it goes on the locational atlas at first. And there are criteria, which I'll show you in a minute, and it gets evaluated by the HPC staff and the commission. The planning board looks at it. They send it to the county council, and the council is the group that finally votes, because they are the legislators for Montgomery County. They're the ones to approve the amendment. Once something is designated an historic site, then the owner would file an historic area work permit, HAWP, with the Department of Permitting Services. The staff reviews it, consults with the property owner, there's a public hearing, and they vote on the application, and it goes through the rest of that as well. So that's the basic outline of that. The criteria in the Montgomery County Code are very similar to what you see at the National Register, at state level, at the many local levels, but it's historic and cultural. And did something significant happen there? Is it architecturally, and architecture and design as well? Architecturally, are there high artistic values? Is it a master architect? Are there a group of persons who influence society? And, all of those different things. It can meet one criteria, or it can meet criterion, or it can meet quite a few of them. The first historic district in Montgomery County was Capitol View Park. So the HPC reviews the applications, and just to very quickly go over what it does and what it doesn't do, it's only exterior modifications that a homeowner is going to make. If it's ordinary maintenance, like painting or fixing a roof or replacing something exactly, it has nothing to do with it, nothing to do with the use or the interior. No one is required to do anything about their buildings, but when it comes before the HPC, they usually have something that they have in mind. And the big standard is compatibility with the character and the nature of the structure, and if it helps in preservation or protections. So since the HPC got working properly after the year 1980 until the current time, I only have statistics more recently, but in the last 7 years, that's from 2018 to 2023, I think, the HPC every year looks at something like 230 to 260 historic area work permits, so it's quite a large load. But there also is an opportunity for staff approvals to happen much more quickly, and there are quite a few of those that happen as well. And as of this month, there are 457 historic sites, 26 historic districts. There still are locational sites and districts on the Atlas, which have to be evaluated, and there are local easements as well, of which I think 3 of those are in Kensington to help with preservation from that. So it's not all you have to do this. There also are financial incentives. There are tax credits that are available, and in this month also, individuals put in their applications for tax credits and for the amount of cost for the work that they did that went through this process. So that's what the government does. Nonprofits in Montgomery County is equally, if not more important, and there are lots of them. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of them. MPI is in the right, but Kensington Historical Society, Silver Spring, Higgins Family Cemetery. I put that in because that's something that Peerless Rockville worked with Kensington Historical Society or the town of Kensington on, because in in the Higgins Cemetery, which is not far from the Twin Brook Metro, just south of it, are the founders, the Knowleses of Knowles Station, which was, of course, your initial name. Other nonprofits, Historic Tacoma has been going since those efforts of the 1960s. Historic Medley is the upper western part of Montgomery County. Sugarland is a black community in that upper western county. The Button Farm is in Germantown, if you're familiar with Tony Cohen and his Underground Railroad workings. Be sure to mention him later on. Bethesda Historical Society is the newest one. Just been formed for about 4 years, and they are doing big things with the Bethesda Meeting House and other things going on. National Park Seminary, you know, that was owned by the Army from World War II until the 1970s, maybe early 80s. And a group formed and said, Army, you're not doing anything with this. You're letting it be demolished by neglect. They sued the Army and won. It took a number of years, but that it ended up with a partnership building new houses and townhouses in there, and then each of the individual buildings that comprised the wonderful school that was the National Park Seminary was sold off to individuals, to groups who put apartments in them or whatever they decided to do, and they were all quite nice. So you know, Boyd's concentrated on the Boyd's Negro School, and that's one of the earliest museums with an historic site. Peerless Rockville. Most recent project was Frida's Cottage, which is a National Historic Landmark in Rockville, Damascus, and Germantown. So there are lots of them. There are probably about 40 groups. So who else cares besides these groups that are made specifically to do this? I'm going to give a shout out to the DAR. I have seen them over and over again, and particularly I'd say in the last 15, 20 years, go out of their way to protect historic sites within their jurisdictions. There are about 10 chapters of DARs in Montgomery County, and they each have a general area, but some of them do things that others don't, and vice versa. This is at the Higgins Cemetery, and Chevy Chase chapter of the DAR has adopted Higgins Cemetery, and they paid for the interpretation sign. The DAR is helping with Ash Memorial Cemetery up in Sandy Spring. The Art Deco Society is absolutely wonderful in coming in whenever there is a modernist or an Art Deco building that is in need. The Silver Theater is one. The Flower Theater is another one. The Art Deco building that the bank that the Historical Society is doing right now. And of course, the Madonna of the Trail is owned by the state chapter of the DAR. The graduates of Carver High School and Junior College in Rockville, which for now is the Board of Education building, but nobody knew what to do with that. Eventually, the Board of Education, because after Brown versus Board of Education, gradually the students were sent to other high schools, and the Board of Education took over that building on Hungerford Drive. What else? Monocacy Cemetery, if you've never been up there to go wandering through that on Bellsville, or some of the little bridges up in the upper county. There's just a lot going on. And did any of you here go on the Metropolitan Branch? Good. Kate can raise her hand too. Okay, on the excursion, yes, the excursion that we had a couple of years ago. So, Heritage Montgomery is another nonprofit. It's a certified heritage area in Maryland. There are 13 of them, and it promotes local history and has an economic impact and an employment impact as well. We're very lucky to have them. And organizations who are within the heritage area, and I think Kensington is as well, because of the railroad theme. If it's not, it should be.
Well, actually, we're on the passport. The station is on the passport.
Okay, that's not, yeah, okay. But there are themes, heritage themes that the Heritage Montgomery has that make it, that link to the heritage area, which is approved by the state of Maryland. That opens up doors to lots of funding, programs, and so on. Montgomery Parks. I don't know if you know that we really started our park system in the 1920s with the Park and Planning Commission when the Regional District Act was produced and started requiring people who were going to start building, mostly in the down county, but expanding everywhere in the county, whenever they started building new subdivisions, whatever they were going to be, if there was an opportunity to save a stream as parkland, to have a public park in there, they took advantage of that. And I've forgotten the numbers now, but they own hundreds of parks, hundreds of acres, 15 cemeteries, lots of buildings like Woodlawn Manor. This is a former Rosenwald School, the Recreation Center in Norbeck. They own Oakley Cabin. They own a little store up there. They do interpretive signs. We wish they would do something about one building that they own, which is the Jessup Blair House in Silver Spring, Jessup Blair and Park. So I'll put in a word for that. But Montgomery Parks does a nice job. And then there are federal and state programs. The department, and this is all through the National Historic Preservation Act. The National Register of Historic Places is a very good place to be on, good list to be on. And that's really what Kensington started doing in the 1970s. That was the first thing that Kensington Historical Society paid attention to, was let's figure out our boundaries. Let's get this community on the in the National Register of Historic Places. You can go up a level with National Historic Landmarks, and I think there are 5 of them in Montgomery County. Clara Barton House, C&O Canal, Frida's Cottage, Observatory in Gaithersburg, but there probably should be others, and those have a slightly higher one. I mentioned the Maryland Historical Trust. There's also a Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, which gets a large fund from the Maryland General Assembly every year, and it has $5 million to spend on projects that have to do with Black history, buildings, cemeteries, education projects all over Maryland. It's been good, and the Maryland General Assembly is involved. I've spent my last 6 months with a lot of other people putting together bills to protect historic cemeteries all over Maryland, and not until, that's the news flash over here, not until about half an hour before the General Assembly adjourned last Monday night did we know that our bills had passed, that the conference between the Senate people and the House agreed on what they were going to put in, and it passed unanimously in both houses. So, but that is part of the programs that what the General Assembly does as well. So there are a lot of current preservation issues. These are the ones that jumped out at me, making preservation more of a priority for decision makers, whatever elected or appointed office that they have. As you know, attracting new generations, new residents, creating fresh uses for old buildings. It was not until, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, did we really understand the importance of 20th century modern architecture, and that includes the Art Deco starting in the 1920s or here in the 1930s and going all the way through the 20th century. And here we were losing, or we still are losing, those buildings. And so the HPC and the Art Deco Society and people who who have those buildings are beginning to understand that they are important. More of them are getting designated as historic sites and so on. Enforcement is always a problem. The cost of maintenance keeps going up, as I'm sure many of you know, and abandoned and neglected cemeteries. And if you want to add anything to that last line, it would be welcome. So here's the mid-century modern part of it. This is, I mean, isn't that a wonderful sign? The rest of the building is nice too, but it's, you know, it just came right out of the early 1960s. Bank in another building in Silver Spring, the bank on the corner. Do you know, we have a Frank Lloyd Wright house in Montgomery County in Bethesda, and it's on the front of this book, Montgomery Modern, which is online if you go to the Montgomery Planning website. In Boyd's, a recent, last year, historic site that was put on the master plan is not modern, but it's a 1950s building, and it's one of the last Negro schools that was built, and 4 elementary schools built just before Brown versus Board of Education. So that history and the fact that it's still available as a school and used by the school service makes that an historic site. And then ComSat in Clarksburg, which you may have been reading about, and it is unique with a unique architect who was very proud of what he did, Cesar Selle. We tried very hard to get that designated, and the county council just decided not. So we're hoping that as the Clarksburg Gateway plan keeps proceeding, that either the current owner will realize that this isn't a great place for more townhouses, that, yeah, we can use at least part of this building to, you know, to show what happened in international communications in our county and started a lot of the things that you see all along 270 today. So it is, it's a National Historic Landmark character building. Cemeteries are current things. If you travel Georgia Avenue, if you go to Aldi's, this is part of the construction that's on Georgia Avenue right in front of Aldi's. It was the site of the Mount Zion Methodist Episcopal Church, which was an African-American church on that site with a cemetery until the church sold it for development and moved elsewhere and went in with another church. And no one did anything about the cemetery. So the cemetery was eventually paved over, literally paved over. So as the State Highway Administration just recently was widening the road and putting sidewalks in, they realized they were on ground that had been used before. Ground-penetrating radar, GPR, was used, and they very quickly found hundreds of burial sites under the pavement there. So there's going to be remediation with that, but these signs kind of tell it all, that you know, we're recognizing that happens, and this is part of the abandoned and neglected cemeteries thing, and it's happening all over Maryland. So there are lots of preservation strategies. Easiest is somebody buys it, they can do whatever they want with it. If you can't buy it, rent it. You know, I've done all of these things. But document it, photograph it, educate people about it, do the good research. I think Kensington Historical Society has a very good record of doing that. And then you have a choice of how you're going to use it. You're going to restore it to the way it looked at its peak or its construction, or you're going to renovate, you're going to rehab, you're going to adapt it for something else. Share this with other people. You have a wonderful education program here, so share it with your people as it's going on. In fact, your house tour on June 7th is going to be a wonderful educational opportunity. Protective law, and they're in different ways, whether they're local or they're not local. Financial incentives, the easements, and those are rights to certain rights to property that you can take to make things happen that you want to without owning the property. And then there's strategies of providing funding. I'm familiar with the four things: Dawson Farmhouse, the Red Brick Courthouse, Montrose School, Frida's Cottage. All of them had some either loans or grants that were involved. And this is Joni Mitchell's again, and I don't know whether she'll come in again or not. But the whole point is you make the best decision you can, and once something is gone, it's gone forever. You can put up all the signs that you want, but you don't have the building to go through the experience of it, and there's an awful lot out there in Montgomery County. So on this slide are two buildings that do not exist anymore. Upper left is the Wheaton Recreation Center, which was one of MPI's tries and fails. And now we have the big Wheaton Library with with all of that in it. And the other is the first purpose-built Rockville Library, which opened in 1971, and that is now the site of the new district courthouse in Rockville. So we lost that one. But there are still a lot of streetscapes that are left here in Kensington, out in rural areas. The one in Durwood is just kind of tucked in there. You can find it. It's a lovely, lovely house with a nice history. And Bethesda Meeting House, which you probably know, on Wisconsin Avenue, which has just been purchased by the foundation, but with the Bethesda Historical Society, and they are doing things. MPI, by the way, has a small grant program, the Wayne Goldstein Fund, and that is helping to fund a piece of not the meeting house itself now, but the parsonage porch next to it. So that will be happening this year. All right, so these are all the reasons why historic preservation matters, and they're all I hope you can infer them, but I think it's every once in a while it's a good idea to put them out. It's that tried and true quality of life, stability, community pride, which you have so much of here, the continuity you feel, the sense of place that you do, the revitalization that comes from business districts and residential areas, and the architecture is a major part of it, and it's a way to appreciate it and to protect it. Tear downs, new development coming up is an issue everywhere, and the fact of designation usually should be protecting against that and making sure that any new construction is compatible. Property values are definitely not going down in historic districts that are well taken care of and acknowledged. You are the foster, the poster child for small businesses and how well that works. Scenic areas and landscapes, streetscapes, scenic roads. And sometimes historic designation just makes everyone stop and think, because you have a process that has to be followed, and it just says, take time to see, what do I care about, what we're going to do, if we're going to have an addition, how compatible should it be, where can we have help from a variety of places. So I'm inviting you to join the Preservation Pantheon. With me and lots of other people here, and you'll recognize some of these people from talks they've given here or awards that they've received over the years. She came in again. I think there's one more slide. Okay, all right, I got her off. Not knowing that was on there, I quoted Joni Mitchell down below. So I'm happy to answer any questions, take any comments, and thank you.
Cool.
One of the things I was appreciating watching Eileen's presentation is I think a lot of people have preservation stereotypes that they use when they hear a conversation about preservation. And I think, you know, there are things like, well, preservation is for really old stuff. If it isn't George Washington slept here, well, then what is it? And I think you made it very clear that things are happening today that need to be looked at and cared for, because in the future we need them preserved. We need their story. We need their physical presence. It isn't just anything that happened in 1800. And I think, you know, that really sort of broadens our view as we think about how the public-private sector, the nonprofits, the advocacy groups, how they work together, and how defining preservation is kind of an amorphous thing as time goes on. And, you know, it's a challenge to keep the equilibrium, particularly in a county that is as fast-growing and busy as ours is, you know, to cause people to stop and care about that place is really important. So we have a gift here of a lot of knowledge, and I hope we have questions on Zoom, we have questions from the group, ask them, take advantage of it.
Okay, the question is, what are some of the reasons that particular buildings are not approved for designation? I think the two examples that you said in your question, ComSat and the Wheaton Youth Center, both are places for which plans are already in place for something else there. So the community of Wheaton, I mean, had definitely outgrown the 1960s recreation center. So do you have a conversation with the community, find out what they want, and put it all into a pot, and then see what kind of a building you need and where it's located? Can you afford to put it there? Does the zoning allow it, and so on? And that's really the process of master planning in Montgomery County. And so for that, it was we need a bigger building in Wheaton, and we already own that property, and oh, yeah, it was nice to have, and, you know, but, you know, we'll go on. Same thing with ComSat. There's a lot of acreage out there. You've seen it on 270 and that whole lovely front lawn and so on. And the designation request from we preservationists was, you don't have to save the whole property. You can put lots of things around it. You don't even have to save the whole building. But rather than only have a sign there saying that there used to be, you know, an internationally important building here, save at least a piece of it so we can see it, we can touch it, we can have a feeling that it was here, and then we can look at the pictures as well. But again, if you look at the plan, that area has been zoned for townhouses for a very long time. And there were a lot of people at the public hearings who got up and said, Clarksburg has enough townhouses, you know, whether they were saying that about ComSat or not. But that's what is on the master plan. So you have to get in very early in telling your elected officials and the planning officials and their staffs what you want. They do surveys with each of these master plans. They are constantly master planning some part of Montgomery County. Just, you know, it started in the 1920s, and it just kind of rolls, and it is a major production, years and years for each one. So, you know, get involved. Yeah, good question.
So I think we ought to probably wrap and go for refreshments. So thank you very much. We all should keep our eyes out for this unfinished revolution.
Yes.
That's going to be published, which is a compilation of all these papers that we got to get through Montgomery history.
Okay, let me clarify that a little bit. Those are being published as the chapters are written. So if you go to montgomeryhistory.org, you can see, I think there are 3 chapters already out, maybe 4. And you can click on that and read them online. Okay?
And I think ultimately when they're all in, they'll be put together in a book.
But this will go on through September.
Yep. September is the actual month of the 250th for Montgomery County. Thank you again to Eileen. Thank you for coming, and we appreciate it.